If you have a dark and twisted soul like me, you've occasionally indulged in morbid little mental games, like what would be the worst way to die? If you had to kill someone, how would you do it? Or simply, what's the worst thing you can think of? And if you're like me, you'll find that if you keep testing the limits of your own sick imagination, if you keep pushing and pushing, you'll inevitably hit upon an idea that's so surprisingly disturbing, it refuses to leave you alone, keeps clinging to your mind like a leech, and it takes you a long time to eventually shake it off. When people talk about SOMA, there's one thing you're guaranteed to hear again and again. I can't stop thinking about it. And neither can I. I finally played this sci-fi horror experience from 2015 a few weeks ago, and I can't stop thinking about the day I went in for a routine brain scan, and a moment later I was in an undersea installation 100 years in the future, finding out that all but the last shreds of humanity were wiped out by a meteor, that the world above is gone. I can't stop thinking about what I saw in the darkened halls of the long-abandoned R&D facility called Pathos 2, or what I saw when I looked in the mirror. But most of all, I can't stop thinking about the little robot at the bottom of the sea. What is the worst thing you can think of? How about the idea of infinity? Harlan Ellison's short story, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, later adapted into a pretty decent game, has an answer to what the worst thing would be. And that thing is an eternity of torture. It's not exactly a novel idea, but Ellison gives it a distinctly sci-fi twist. Like SOMA, I Have No Mouth finds narrative possibility in the idea of AI, and the stomach-churning implications that arise when you imagine an existence that could, theoretically, go on forever. The centre of Ellison's story is Am, a supercomputer gone rogue, which kills off humanity, but in its hateful nature keeps 5 human beings alive as its playthings. They are doomed to wander Am's immense subterranean depths, never aging, picking their way through cables and steel plating in search of food, in search of warmth, in search of respite that will never come.
There is no way to describe the pains that not having eaten for months brought us. And yet we were kept alive. Stomachs that were merely cauldrons of acid, bubbling, foaming, always shooting spears of sliver-thin pain into our chests. It was the pain of the terminal ulcer, terminal cancer, terminal paresis. It was unending pain.
Am's thirst for suffering is its prime directive, matched only by the immense intelligence it harnesses to devise ever more brutal and ingenious methods of torture. And because its hatred is infinite, its pleasure in the human's pain is infinite too. The horror of eternity depicted on the page in oppressive detail, unbearable fear and pain and insanity that isn't just long, isn't just a lifetime or 1,000 lifetimes or 1,000,000 lifetimes long, but infinitely long.
Oh, Jesus, sweet Jesus, if there ever was a Jesus, and if there is a God, please, please, please let us out of here, or kill us. Because at that moment I think I realized completely, so that I was able to verbalize it, Am was intent on keeping us in his belly forever, twisting and torturing us forever. The machine hated us as no sentient creature had ever hated before, and we were helpless. It also became hideously clear, if there was a sweet Jesus and if there was a God, the God was Am.
The closest echo to Ellison's story in SOMA comes during a moment in which you need to reroute power to progress, But by doing so, you end up electrocuting an apparently sentient machine that shrieks and begs you to make it stop as you turn around and walk away. Later, your companion will confirm what you may already have suspected. That robot contained a human consciousness, and you condemned it to literally endless agony. This machine has a mouth, and it sure can scream. It's at other moments, though, that SOMA delivers a more subdued, under-the-nails horror, replacing the screaming and wailing with something even worse. Ominous quiet, the endless, echoing silence your footsteps leave in the wake of an awful decision. Like the one you make at the bottom of the sea where you meet the robot. You don't know how long she's been here. A human consciousness copied and reactivated inside a broken machine at the bottom of the ocean floor with no one for company. She might have been like this for decades before you showed up. She greets you calmly, even warmly.
What's your name?
Robin Bass, Theta Field Service Technician.
Nice to meet you, Robin.
She doesn't ask me to kill her. I'm not forced to kill her to progress, but I have the choice. She seems confused, but she doesn't seem to be suffering. I take one last look at her, and I choose to leave her. I don't know if it was the right choice, but every so often I think about her, and I imagine being in her position, trapped in the silent grey murk for an infinity. Or at least as long as it takes for a CPU to degrade and flicker out. She's still down there somewhere, at the bottom of the ocean floor, her voice ringing out in the gloom. What's the worst thing you can think of? How about the idea that you're a bad person? One of SOMA's key choices comes in its second half, once you've already realised what you are, what all of the robots you've come across are, as well as your companion, Catherine. A brain in a vat, the mind of someone who lived and died a long time ago, but had the fortune or misfortune of having their brain scanned while they were alive, not knowing that their digitised consciousness would, many years later, be hooked up to a jumble of electronics and brought back to life by the malfunctioning AI of the Pathos 2 facility. Simon Jarrett went in for a diagnostic brain scan in Toronto in 2015, and a copy of his consciousness, you, woke up 100 years later in a not quite human body after the world had already ended. But it's a body that won't fit into the heavy-duty suit you need to progress to Station Tau, which lies at the bottom of a deep-sea trench. Catherine tells you she can do another consciousness transfer to the body already inside the suit, so you sit down and ready yourself.
There must be something wrong. Can't you run a diagnosis or something?
That voice coming from the next room? It's you. Your own body from seconds prior, now fallen unconscious, as you realise too late that the consciousness transfer wasn't a transfer. It was a copy-paste. And now you get to choose. Pull the plug on him, or leave him to wake up, stranded and alone in an undersea station full of monsters, with no way to leave. What you do here won't affect how the story goes. Unlike other games that offer you choices, SOMA doesn't give you in-game consequences for any of yours. In SOMA, all you have is your own feeling, the question of what you would do, and it makes the choice feel not just important, but uncomfortably personal. And the choice of what to do to previous Simon may be the most vivid and haunting choice I've ever had to make in a game. What you're seeing is footage from my first playthrough, where I ran around for minutes on end, literally going back and forth about what to do. I could explain further how SOMA wormed its way into my brain, but I'd rather read you a Reddit post by Darwin322. It needs a bit of context if you haven't played the game, but bear with me. In the discussion around this game, the iterations of the protagonist, Simon, are numbered. So Simon 1 is the original, who went in for a brain scan 100 years ago and died shortly thereafter. Simon 2 is the version who wakes up 100 years later in Pathos 2, and when he transfers himself into the diving suit, that's Simon 3, who continues the journey up until the final deep sea station, where he'll find out that Catherine lied to him about the possibility of escape, stranding him in the game's finale. Now here's Darwin322.
I've done playthroughs where I choose not to deactivate Simon 2, and instead leave him a trail of items from the pilot's seat to the airlock door, as a signal to wait for Simon 3 to come back once he wakes up and realizes Catherine is gone. On another, I hunted down all the writing utensils and tech manuals I could find on Tau, so that Simon 3, me the player, could leave Simon 2 a message explaining that Catherine lied and where they're planning to go next. The ending will never change, so you have to think for yourself what you can do to continue on after the game ends proper.
After the game ends proper. Like it's a given that the characters will somehow continue to live on after the end credits roll and you click exit for the last time. But these are the lingering after effects of SOMA, a game that makes you feel so personally responsible for your horrid choices that you might find yourself engaging in completely pointless actions just to alleviate the dread. Just to be able to do something that reflects your anguish at the terrible choice you've had to make. But nothing you can do will fully silence your conscience. That lingering, did I do the right thing? No, Darwin322, you didn't do the right thing. There is no right thing. What's the worst thing you can think of? Is it dying suddenly without having a chance to come to terms with it? Or knowing you're about to die and just having to wait for it to happen? It's a question I sometimes pick at in my mind, and it's back again after playing SOMA. I always pointlessly weigh up the options, and usually I decide that if I had to die, I'd rather not see it coming. It's the same result in the end, isn't it? Just less terror. I remind myself of this when I think back to what I chose. It feels impossible to kill this being that was me. But am I going to let him wake up knowing that nothing but terror and death await him? I start crying and I say, I'm sorry. I literally say, I'm sorry out loud. And I turn off the machine. He didn't see it coming. It's for the best. Right? It's a limp justification, similar to the one the narrator offers at the end of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, after he's mercy killed his companions and seen the life go out of their eyes.
At least the 4 of them are safe at last.
But who's he kidding? Who am I kidding? I found the stranded underwater robot a good way into the game, after I'd already unplugged a robot and watched the light in its eyes go out, after I'd removed life support from a person in order to power a train, after I'd left a machine screaming in endless anguish behind me. I chose to leave her at the bottom of the sea, and even at the moment I did it, I knew it wasn't an act of compassion or mercy, but guilt, for all the lives I'd already cut short, far too callously. I needed to prove to myself that I am a good person who does value life. Someone who couldn't bear it if every one of her interactions in Pathos 2 ended with her euthanizing everybody. So, selfishly, I left the robot, the remnants of a human mind trapped inside a robot, at the bottom of the sea, to prove something to myself, to try and silence the questions and accusations that are still ringing in my ears, the same way they are with poor Darwin 322. SOMA won't give you consequences. It won't remember your choices. But you will. I started this video with a Philip K. Dick quote, but SOMA begins with another one. Reality is that which, when you stop believing it, doesn't go away. I could have written a whole other video about how SOMA channels PKD and other classic science fiction authors, ones who used hypothetical scenarios to confront terrifying realities, and how SOMA easily rivals them all in the flawed humanity of its characters and the heartbreaking detail of its environments. But more than anything, I just wanted to share my own story with SOMA, and the reason it now lives somewhere under my skin, in the same dark place nightmares and morbid mental games spring from. SOMA is a combination of the best kind of horror and the best kind of science fiction, because its biggest frights aren't the monsters that roam its corridors, but the monsters it births in your mind. About what a fate worse than death could possibly be. About having your own morality tested and coming up lacking. About what you would do given the power to decide when human life and human consciousness are worth preserving and when they aren't. Realities, questions, what ifs, that no matter how hard you try to put them out of your mind, refuse to go away.
I don't understand. Is this what it's supposed to look like? I expected something different. Where is everyone? I'm not the only one who got scanned.